of execution is second to none. Execution is your real moat. Liquidity is your secondary buffer. Users your tertiary. Looking back and knowing what you know now about any of the tech titans, you can be like, all right, like I had the opportunity to place a bet on Sergey Brin and I didn't take it, right? And in 20 years from now, are you going to regret that choice? And the answer with Jeff and Hyperliquid is absolutely.
Jim, everyone, thanks for listening in to another episode of Open Interest. Today we have Andrew from HypurrFi, one of the builders that we have been working with for a long time, and they've been doing some super interesting, but also random stuff, decoding the Hyperliquid binary. And as we're discussing all things trading, we want to get them on the episode to discuss why they're doing this, what they want to get out of this, and what's like the bigger vision of decoding something that is closed source to such an important financial system. A financial system that crypto has tried to make work multiple cycles in the past. We had DYDX and we had a lot of iterations of perpetual dexes before, but Hyperliquid has seemed to be the first one that has actually stuck around and has stuck around in a post-incentive state. So why don't you jump straight into it and tell us why exactly are you guys trying to decode the Hyperliquid binary? Yeah, I'd love to understand why you guys are doing this and what drew you to it.
Great. Yeah. Hey, everybody. Andrew from HypurrFi here. I'm one of the co-founders. I'm the CEO, and also I wear the CTO hat. But yeah, the Hyperliquid binary, Hyperliquid in general. So let's just talk quickly about Hyperliquid. You mentioned that it's this new financial ecosystem. I like to think about Hyperliquid on the technical side of things. It's like a ledger of ledgers, or rather a consensus of multiple ledgers. So you have like your perp ledger, your HIP3 ledger, you've got your spot markets, you've got your EVM. These are all different ledgers that are all wrapped inside of this thing. And so it does have the capability to become like the internet of money. Right? I've said a few times, like Wall Street's 3.0 moment. You think about it from an overall trader first perspective, high throughput capable machine, but it's pretty opaque. So we don't really know a ton of what's going on. We can glean and speculate and try to figure that out. And so, if you look at this from an ecosystem perspective, we have rampant speculation around what's happening in the binary or what's happening with the protocol. It's given that it's closed source, and ecosystems are typically broken into two categories: those that are in the know and those that don't. And even those that are in the know here, like that are closer to the metal, so to speak, we don't even know. And then there's, those that just don't know. They have to look and rely on a third-party source for anything, whether it's a news aggregator, person like myself digging in and trying to figure stuff out, or when we find out, we get the actual canonical spec and it becomes a thing to then use, right? So until then, though, we have this, this incredible speculation that goes on, and for better or for worse, there's a lot of unknowns that are out there, right? And so unknowns can drastically shape and change narrative around what's happening, what you're building, what you'd want to do. And the better you can get from a data perspective, just helps you, understand what's going on in the market and better kind of meet it. So, looking at this from what we don't know, we start to think through okay, well, what can we go find out, and what's the value in finding out? And so for us, the how is, I guess what we'll discuss as part of this, but the why is looking through this, and Hyperliquid is a core dependency for us. HypurrFi is built on top of the EVM, we're branching further into the hypercore side of the equation in terms of how facilities work. We've got HIP4 coming, which is going to unlock binary options as well as multi-outcome markets. How you want to interact with those. You want to start doing, UI design. So there's a lot of value to being early, to understanding how some of these primitives work and flow from a more technical level, as well as things start to change. This team ships at an incredible pace. The number of times I've had to redo the same grunt work on the reverse engineering side of things, because we get a new binary on the testnet every other day and we follow the sync and whatever it may be. And so for me, and for us at HypurrFi rather, this is just, it's a part of the puzzle. And so it allows us to understand and, also get a kind of better understanding for maybe building where the puck is going. I'm trying to think more into the future. And for us, this is a multi-decade journey that we're on here with Hyperliquid. We look at this as being, the place that is the financial future. And so to better understand it early, there's a real edge and a real alpha to that. And so for us, this is, looking through a way that we can maybe break down that or disseminate some better understanding in terms of how we think things are working with this, core dependency that we have, and kind of play it from there. But guaranteed that there's others that are further on in their journey that are just not public about it. Being able to, understand how these nodes gossip and they talk, and be able to write software that is like gossiping and talking to these things as though it's one of them is, an incredibly powerful edge, because suddenly you can, build better dev tooling or infrastructure. Indexers, bots, market makers could all run natively. They're also like a node. So they're out there peering, they're listening, they're, scrubbing the native gossip stream, and being able to react to it in real time at speeds that would normally not be available to anyone that would have to go to layer up. Like if you have to rely on some third party node provider giving you data and serving you data and whatever their request time and all that stuff. Even if it's your own node, you still got to query the Hyperliquid binary for data, and you only get a limited subset. And so there's a lot of reasons why you'd want to have an edge.
Yeah, for sure. And there's just so much value flowing through Hyperliquid. I think what you said is exactly right. I think you guys are maybe the first ones to do it publicly, but I would bet money that almost every single trading firm that is on Hyperliquid today has already put an effort to do this. And it's, they're a trading firm at the end of the day, and however they can find edge, if they can't get an edge in the way that they normally do, which is, using physical infrastructure to get these latency edges, they're going to try and do it through the software, which is very interesting. Do you have a take on why Hyperliquid kept it closed source? It's like Hyperliquid is like open finance, but then like there's this one critical thing that they've kept closed source. Did you have a theory, since you've been so close to the binary, on why they would have wanted to have kept it this way?
Yeah, I think it's just, I think the major impetus is that the forest is very dark out there, and whatever you can do to prevent, especially in the state of AI today, like whatever you can do to prevent threat actors or competition or anybody getting your edge, because your edge is it only exists until you give it to an LLM, and then suddenly there's no more edge anymore. It's distilled into 80 variants that are all maybe even plus ones, plus tens versus like whatever you would normally have access to. So I think there's a real pragmatic reason there. And, I think what's an interesting, point on that there though, is like, I think that they see a world where there's multiple clients as the natural end state of this. I think they think that there's like, I think Jeff is so pragmatic that he would be foolish to believe only ever Hyperliquid and people that he facilitated to bring in to do this could be, right? Look at how the infrastructure is designed. It's got this broadcaster ring, multiple participants. You could imagine these things, like again, this is pure speculation here just for all the listeners out there, but you could imagine like globally distributing your broadcaster network so that you had a hub in North America, a hub in South America, a hub in Asia, Africa, and all of these things were, your bundlers. So if you think about like how global data centers right now, like they basically bundle transactions and they loop through basically fiber optic cables so that everyone gets a fair advantage in terms of when and how they participate. So if you look at priority fees as a great example, it lets you, skip the infrastructure cost to go right to the line. You're paying a premium on that, but that's good because that's like a hard signal cost against all the other noise that's out there from a trader, like hard desire on being positioned, canceled, whatever it may be from an overall liquidity perspective. But I think that this and I think a part of it, that makes me believe this is that their own comments in the binary say like, this is the Hyperliquid reference implementation. Like, so typically when there's a reference on something, like you expect there to be using this as like, this is the thing that you want to do, but like you want to optimize for different spectrums, like go do research, right? Like think about Hyperliquid, it's also going to have to go post quantum. Do you have post quantum researchers on staff? No. Who are the leading post quantum researchers globally? Like, I think that's where we see more openness when we actually have to fight more challenges that are not supplanted by a team of excellence, right? And so Hyperliquid is very unique that its team operates so dominantly for its size. And so I think we need to be real when we ask ourselves is like, it's not about the scale of finances that they take on. The risk certainly changes depending on how big this gets, but the engineering requirement, like if we're solving trading based problems, there's a good chance that Jeff has the team to solve the trading problems. And so if it's a distribution problem, we see this and we say, okay, HIP-3 was a solution to solving your own distribution problems. It allowed for people like trade, markets, et cetera, to come in and provide those offerings where you don't want to have to scale your team to go meet. So what are those other areas that we think are going to be relevant to Hyperliquid success? And I think that is where we start seeing more and more openness, getting to a point where the next evolution of HyperBFT, the PQ version, like, are we going to ignore the world's leading post-quantum cryptographic researchers? No, of course not. At some point in time, they're gonna have to be a part of the funnel and a part of the flow. Like, I have a tweet beforehand, like many, many moons ago, that I believe the future of Ethereum is actually Hyperliquid from an adoption perspective. Like, you don't just use the EVM and then decide you're going to throw it away. Like, the EVM is like such an ankle weight. So, like, if
Yeah.
you wouldn't go swimming with the EVM if you didn't believe that that you could float, right? Like, it would
Yeah.
drag you to the bottom of the ocean. And so at some point in time, you need to believe that, like, we're going to pull researchers that are currently the EF researchers. ETH is in an overall mind share collapsing, but the EVM as an adoption accelerating. And so they become the natural reason why the EVM has relevance in the next decade. Like, the major proponent, if you want to think about, like, we're replacing COBOL with Solidity, and we're replacing, the running infrastructure layer with Hyperliquid. And the EVM lets us have this rather benign, dumb layer that we can have users interface with, and it's largely solved from, if you want to think about from an overall how and what perspective. And then innovation happens in the bespoke world where we need custom things for custom problems, like, data layers, Oracle redundancy, settlement requirements for outcomes, any of these kind of things. I think will be continued to be where we innovate aggressively on the periphery.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And you mentioned before the how of how you guys have done this, and I think it's very relevant. And before you dive into it, I think we're seeing this. You mentioned security as well. I think this is exactly what we are seeing on the security side as well, is that AI has just, I think before this, we had this concept of like security is just how much effort do you need to put in to get the money. And as long as there is an easier thing to go after, it's kind of like when you like galvanize metal, you have like a sacrificial anode, but in security. But that's completely gone now. And I think that's why we have seen these massive hacks. And given not all of them have been actual smart contract security issues, so they've mostly been people issues. But I think it's crazy to see how AI has just completely eliminated this thing that held the industry together before, where audits were in some ways just a delay on how much effort the DPRK was going to put into trying to exploit your protocol. But that was my ramble on security. How did you guys actually go about using AI to decode the binary for Hyperliquid?
Yeah.
And maybe for the audience, do you want to explain what a binary is? Because I don't actually think they understand how insane it is to decode a binary.
When you write computer code, you write it in some language like JavaScript, the web guys, Rust, C++, C whatever. So then you have compilers that take all that stuff you've written. They extract out all the actual instruction sets of what you're actually asking it to do. They convert that to machine code language, some intermediary, which ultimately becomes ones and zeros. So then you take all this, you basically put it into what's called executable. So that's your binary. And so basically it's just like think of like a giant container that you can then ship to people, and you can run it on your computer, and it's packaged in a way that it's 99% of the time is going to run on your machine that it's compatible with. So you just click and install. So if you have like an EXE or, a Mac app or Linux app, whatever, like, you're watching this or listening to this podcast on something, you're running a binary to do that. So the app that you're actually running is compiled code. So like these are typically black boxes, right? And like you can glean some things, but like typically it's just machine code, not a lot for the human to read. So like enter the age of AI and LLMs. These things are machines. You give it binary, it reads binary. So it understands aggressively what this stuff is. There are a lot of limitations, and tooling is what you have to basically spend energy, inference on at the current time. So for us, it's, largely agent orchestration. Like, I have ideas and I ask it to do things. If you heard about Karpathy's auto researcher, at its core, it's essentially that. You give it a task, breaks down a series of what you want to do, and you feed it at the actual objective. So now that, it comes down to like what you want to do. And so, you can just read the code and you can get some understanding of things, but nothing that like tells you the truth. You can get strings, which would be like any kind of text or anything that's actually like compiled into the code that can't be put into ones and zeros. It's just like left in reference to like, whatever it might be. So you can get all the error messages as an example. Okay. So you can understand failure cases. And so the best way to frame it is like, think about it as like a giant puzzle box. And you pour it out all on the floor and you're like, oh, okay, let's like go find the edges, right? That's your first thing you want to do.
Yeah.
Similar thing with reverse engineering anything is find the truth that you know you could easily find to either confirm or eliminate any hypothesis that you might want to make. So you just start tearing apart these puzzles and figure out which ones you can turn over, and some of them you don't know what's on either side of them. You have to go figure that out. So you can write tooling that lets you figure some stuff out. You can get into all manner of attack surfaces. Right now, my current focus, as an example, is working on an Eclipse attack. So convincing the binary that I am a legitimate peer and feeding it fake data and forcing it to process and go through the process. So you can do this with like binary patches. There's a lot of stuff that you
Nice.
can facilitate and allow for. So you're literally just changing the ones and zeros literally inside the container. So you're just like, oh,
Yeah.
I mean, like we know that this is a function that checks on the number of block, the follow distance we're supposed to be at, or the peer list, and these kind of things. And so you can just flip it and check bits. And so
Yeah.
it's a lot about just like the black box, and then you kick it, and did you get a desired result? Normally, this would take a human or a team of people, like endless days and hours and weeks and months to do. Like I just set it up and it's supposed to be a CPU bound tool. Like I go to sleep and I just wake up and there's been, 600 man hours have been spent on attacking the surface of the binary. And so we've had some pretty cool wins in terms of being able to, understand like the hashing mechanisms on the inside of things, how data's framed, how it's gossiped. And, again, like it's just an LLM like iterating and being like, okay, some of it's brute force and like, okay, like the number of possible options here, they're like, it's 45 million. Like we can brute force it in 20 minutes, or we can spend 2 days trying to engineer a system to like actually capture it legitimately. You're like, oh, okay, brute force that. You're like, okay, well, we actually got it on like the 16th million permutation. You're like, okay, sweet, great. Glad that happened while I was asleep though. And like, not like I had
Yeah.
to be available for any of that.
Just sit
So,
there. Yeah.
right, exactly, right? Like, could you imagine like, even just writing the tool to properly brute force, right? Like the amount of debugging you'd have to go to make sure that you're actually even attacking a target correctly is a pain on its own. So like that is where I think like AI is crazy because it just reads stuff. It's like, oh, well, I mean, it imported all these libraries. It can only do one of like, I think it did some crazy computation, but it's like the number of functions it's actually using, there can't be that many. It did the math. It was like some quadrillion. It's like, okay, that's actually kind of a lot.
Yeah.
But you think about like, like state hashing. It's like, okay, well, like they use message pack. And so I just asked them like, okay, are they using like truncated versions? Like what let's just like go compare to our state output, like what's actually written to files. So that's another thing, like, any major action that is happening from the perspective of the binary. So it has to access the file system, it has to access memory, networking, any of these things as the host, like you control, right? So you can like fully capture every packet being sent out, every packet coming in, and even if it's encrypted, you are also the host. And so you can just like man in the middle of these things and it doesn't matter. And so you get to learn an awful lot around how these things operate just by having them run on a host that's fully capturing and tracking things. And again, you're feeding it to an AI. Like I would say I'm not doing very much, just, being a little bit of humility there, but like, absent like the desire and the want and the prompt and the inference, like, anyone can do this, which is I want, a lot of people gave me a lot of, criticism at first, like, why are you doing this? I'm like, oh, I mean, like, because North Korea's done it. Like, every major
Yeah.
trading firm
Exactly.
has got some edge gleaned into this. Like, why not the rest of us? And so it's
Yeah.
been definitely fun.
Yeah. 100%. Is there something that you found in the binary that was unexpected, or have you found anything which points to an edge in Hyperliquid's design over
Totally. Homomorphic hashing.
other perpetual?
Yeah. So
Explain.
lattice
Sounds like
hashes.
gibberish to me.
Yeah. So the notion of like how how they construct things. So rather than having to like, when they added the EVM as a great example.
Yeah.
Okay. So the EVMs could all these different account states and it's like its own worldview and stuff. And so Hyperliquid though, like it's got like an additive hash to it. So like, if you think about what you're actually securing, like back to that notion of like one consensus, multiple ledgers. So you've got like a hash for your hypercore state and you've got a hash for your EVM state. Right now, like not that I imagine they would add another virtual machine, but if you wanted to, you could add a whole third virtual machine or a fourth, and they just become
Yeah.
additive. to the equation. Now you have to keep them as you're
Gotcha.
slotting them, but this allows for you to distribute consensus on these things very quickly because you don't have to combine the whole thing and hash them. They're like two separate hashes combined together at the very end. So you're like additively hashing hashes.
Yeah.
Hot stuff, which is a part of their consensus that was based on HyperBFT, is a hot stuff variant. So lattice hashes came from Facebook as well, as along with hot stuff. So I imagine that lattice hashes were part of the breakthrough from hot stuff that helped with the better distribution of consensus around leadership in terms of who is sending what and voting on different things that are happening. I think for me, like one of the cooler things around that is just this notion of how like consensus works, not just beyond the HyperBFT, but like what you're actually validating. If you're a non-validating node, you're like not actually executing blocks. You're just applying blocks to your state. You're just like, okay, this is the delta, and they go through. But if you're a validator, your validators are executing everything. And so you can force a validator to replay so they can actually go through it. But like from an overall execution perspective, it's just like every 2000, I think, is at the checkpoint, every 2000 blocks. And your non-validating nodes will just like make sure that they're like properly in sync so that they actually have been applying correctly. They're seeing the proper world state and that kind of stuff. So these are feel like really pragmatic design choices versus like in terms of a trade-off, like you get hard finality from every block, but then you've only got like broad consensus every 2000 for your non-validating peers. So like where if you think about like Ethereum, when you get a new block, you execute that full block and you apply it, you hash it, you validate your hashing, all that stuff. But like if you're a non-validating node, like you don't do that until like you've seen 2000, and then you actually go through the flow and make sure that you're actually hashing, you see everything correctly, and that you're in sync. And if you're not, well, then you'd be like, okay, we need to go fetch new data. And what did we get wrong? Who did we and how? Because you're like,
Yeah.
okay, I've been lied to. So that feels like a very deliberate design from a latency perspective, so that you have all these peers who are like relaying and being able to participate, not being bogged down in the execution cost of having nothing at stake. So they're most likely not on a machine that is designed and performant to be able to doing 70 millisecond blocks. But
Is
I think
that
those
so
would be the
that
big ones.
non-validating nodes can be lighter in the
I believe
hardware that they
so.
use, or so that they can be faster? Because
So,
like from my perspective, like a non-validating node is someone who doesn't care about consensus in
yeah,
this case, right?
well, but non-validating nodes are gossiping, right? So you can build
Yeah.
infrastructure on a node that's listening, right? But you need to know that if you're taking any data off of it, it's telling you the truth. Right? You can't trust the node source
Yeah.
unless you also know that it's checkpointing and up to date in that respect. But I think it's just so that you can have like sentry nodes, so that if you're a validator and you want to offer peering services out to people, that your sentry nodes that you would be like putting in front of your validator in the back, sentries in the front, and those would be what's actually serving your traffic. It's so that those can be highly performant, can be on distributed across, less than highly performant boxes, so that you can keep your actual like heavy infrastructure for your validator so that it can run performantly. And then you could ship out scale however many of these, things in front you would want. The validator that I run on testnet that's sometimes been up, like it's on a really beefy machine. I can't imagine you'd have to run multiple of these just to service out simple requests from, backend state. But if you don't have a beefy machine, then there's no way you're going to be able to do these 70 millisecond blocks. So it feels like that is a trade-off in terms of how you get a swarm out there that is up to date with you. Well, like what is 2000 blocks at 0.07 seconds? Yeah. So 2.5 minutes.
Maybe looping discussion back to HypurrFi. Does this tie in to what you guys are building at HypurrFi? And if it's a secret source, you don't have to share, but I'm curious as to how, and maybe you can speak a bit to HypurrFi's vision from where it is today to, you guys launched Mueller, which has been great. We're a user of it. What's next, and how does the work you guys are doing on the binary tie into it, if it does?
Yeah, great question. So we've been thinking a lot about the future of Hyperliquid and being I would say very opportunistic in terms of what that future might look like. And so, is there a world where there's other deployers into the borrow lend apparatus? Most likely. Currently in the
Yeah.
binary, no. But, of all things Hyperliquid, you could see that becomes a world where that makes sense. What is after outcomes? No idea, but it's going to show up in the testnet binary first. And so a part of this is like the notion of the HIP3 deployer stake, looking at and seeing how that is going to be the most likely, the binary seems to hint very heavily towards this. You reuse the same stake. So like, Kinetic markets and, Trade XYZ will be able to do binaries probably very soon after of their own market feeds that they already have. Huge unlock. If you're a HIP3 deployer, you can do perps and you can do binaries. Maybe you just do one or the other, but it's all the same price feed that backs the outcome. So you're still settling this data. And I think that's like for me, a big takeaway is like that it's not like they're very pragmatic in terms of what they do. Like once they have a thing that works, they want to reuse the thing that works. Like, there's really good matching engine, right? But like, why would you do a whole other thing for outcomes if you can just treat your outcomes like spot assets on your already really good spot engine? And so like these things are really pragmatic to see, right? So you're like, okay, if we add another thing, do we get a version of spot that is like permission spot market so that you could have TradFi requirements met for participating bodies, entities, right? If you think about spot
Yep.
assets in general, they already come with freeze lists and allow lists. Maybe that's not so far off of what they already have, right? So to get Tether on the platform, they had to give the ability to freeze deposits. Now, again, my pure speculation, but that feature went live, or it was already live. We just didn't know. But then, USDT0 was available very, very shortly after. And Tether set up the blacklists and primitives of themselves that they manage on Hypercore. So you're like, okay, cool. Like there is a reasonable response to market players that are beyond the builder tier, right? There's like those of us that are out here because we can be the permissionless side of the equation. But then there's also like the internal BD that's happening that drives change that comes down the pipe. And so all these things are going to be available ahead of time. So we start to think and say, the future will be in the binary long before it is written in a doc, long before it is put anywhere else. And that's been the case for a while, and that might change. I think that will change when we go to an open model where it's open development for Hyperliquid versus closed development. I would say like Hyperliquid, while yes, it is a production state for a lot of net new things, like it's still beta, right? Like portfolio margin, they intentionally limit the size of the exposure they want to take on these things. And the beta takes not to downplay the capability, but it would be to set expectations on production state functionality. Like we have guards in place because the uncertainty principle is still high on some of these things. So like rubber has to meet the road, like we just recently got HIP3 backstop vaults as an example, right? So deployer can put up capital that backstops now. The system will backstop it. P&L can't leave. So it's like a permanent security buffer, so if we're just getting those things now, like it's hard to, qualify all of it as like, it's an ongoing moving target, which is actually part of its beauty though, is that this is a thing that you can truly understand and believe once you're here that it's like, it's not done. And so I think that's a big part of the equation too, is that it's just not done.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And it's kind of like the binary gives you this insight beyond because Hyperliquid just doesn't say a lot, right? When they do stuff, they'll just do stuff and then people will find it. Someone will find it and put it on X and people will be like, whoa, holy shit, Hyperliquid is now competing with Polymarket in some way. And now Polymarket is trying to hit back by launching perps. I think it's always very interesting the way that Hyperliquid develops. It's very out of nowhere. We saw this like when HIP2 first came out. I think like I can say that I looked at it, I'm like, I just don't know how this is gonna work. This is like, it goes against everything that you would think, because it's like creating fragmentation, but now that we've seen it in action, it has worked way better than I think anyone expected, and it's led to this massive competition between these deployers to bring these assets to market. I think it's made them all be faster, and it's been like very different from Lida's approach, where Lida has done everything internally, which I think has its own merits as well. But speaking of HIP4, what's your take on it, and what do you think is going to be the most exciting thing to come out on HIP4? And how do you think this plays into Polymarket's role and like Kalshi's role in the market today?
Yeah, great question. So I'm really excited on HIP4 because I think personally, it'll be the most level playing field for non-binary options. So like binary options are still going to go to the power law players. Like it's their price feeds, their users are going to think about that perspective. Like why would they go? Why would you trade elsewhere? Like why would you come trade my binary markets of the S&P 500 when units got hundreds of millions of open interests and binary markets probably have very similar, like power law is still in effect there. That's like the harsh reality I think most people didn't grok going into the HIP-3 side of the equation. It's like it really is denominated by power law outcomes. And so like, you know, most things are that have mass consumer adoption. Although, like in post Aave RS ETH, we're going to see the power law break down for lending markets or general risk hubs. HIP-3 is different in this perspective, right? So like it's the same engine, so you're not really like taking differentiated risk. It's just a different ledger inside the same engine. All matched the same way, facilitated the same kind of deal. HIP-4 though, with actual like outcomes, specific multi outcomes, like presidential races are going to be huge. Sports betting, all that stuff. I don't really find that like it's gonna be huge. I shouldn't downplay it. Like, but it's not appealing to me. Like as an actual participant in the market, I think what's going to be the most used thing, and it may sound silly right now, but is like hedging your trades with stuff Trump may say or the next president, or facilitating on geopolitical problems. Like this is what hedge funds do right now, right? Like they have someone who will, out there and they're, betting against the company to collapse and exposure against something else. And, one secures the other from collapse kind of deal. We as retail participants in like, the prosumer category, fragmented liquidity on these things sucks. I don't trade prediction markets because I have to move capital to go trade prediction markets. So like, and I take on a whole different risk segment. I take on someone else's security profiles, apps I've never used before, maybe chains I've never used before. And so this is going to sound like Grimmer's like a boomer. Like, I almost never bridge anywhere. I try to facilitate and build a financial apparatus where I want my capital to be. And I just won't use other apps. And I miss out on a ton of things, right? But I also get, keep my risk exposure to where I want it to be. And so I have to believe I'm not alone in that notion either, right?
100%, yeah.
I think that we will see good competition from the poly market side of the equation, bringing perps out. I don't think we're going to see because they have their own users, probably have a very similar feeling to me. They don't want to go using that. They want to trade perps, but they don't want to go to Hype. Like, I don't want to go to Hyperliquid. Like, I don't want to move there. It's like, silly for them. They should want to come, but like that's a reasonable market position to have, right? And same with your Robinhood perps traders, and they'll take a slightly shittier experience because they don't want to actually endure moving costs. But this is a nice but here. The best experience is going to win over time because fees have to become the thing that people talk about, right? When everyone's going to, when we all become the racing to the bottom, you're like, okay, well, like we got to race to, we see it in everything. Like, okay, we're racing down on rates. Okay. We're racing down on fee capture. Okay. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's like, what do you actually own in the equation? So like in Hyperliquid is very uniquely positioned here because they don't have marketing. They're not paying for things, right? But they own the users. They own their hearts and their minds. And that's the thing you can't buy. And so this is what I believe becomes just like the constant like drumbeat that is out there. Like the Hyperliquid mafia that is out there just, shilling Hyperliquid to anyone and everyone that will listen. And I have to believe it exists for the poly market people or the Kalishi people, but like, I don't see it. Right? I don't see that aspect of, zealotry. They have regular users who they will hop from one service to the other and whatever it may be. And so we're going to see a little bit of both in terms of the competition apparatus and some like loyal defender, that old meme that where you see the two fighting sides on each side of the river. One side loves their homeland and can't believe the others live the way they do. So a lot of that. But what this opens up and the broader aspect of this is this notion of, I said it a few times beforehand, but like a good trading environment is going to have this thing called the signal capital bias that is going to be really high. And so the notion of being able to enter and exit and freely leave, take on leverage, take on risk, basically trade risk or hedge or whatever your need of the market is, like whatever the market can give you and you can buy from it, Hyperliquid is going to have it to offer. And they just ship so fast, man. It's crazy. Like having been in Ethereum and like being used to release cycles that maybe happen once a year if we're lucky, if we all successfully fought each other for a whole 12 months and pulled it off, That's, and I use we there very loosely, having never been involved in the core development of Ethereum really. But as a participant, like as a listener, and like trying to understand, building in the open is incredibly slow, right? So if you think that time is against us, right, and in order to make a change for the better before whatever is coming, does that, you need a team that is willing to give it their all, sacrifice everything, and just go all in. And I will say, like, open clients are going to slow that down. So being opened when we aren't, we being the community and those that are going to be I want this, here's my suggestion, here's my, HIP 22, my HIP, whatever, politicking for these things to come in, but it will happen. And ossification of Hyperliquid will have to happen at some point in time. What that means and looks like we don't break the first version. We look at migrating to the next version. Has a liquidity go? All these things, like, as we're going to be Hyperliquid layer 2s, where does this go? These are all questions that inevitably arise when you have open development. And I don't think we're going to have it anytime soon. I'll put that out there. I think, we're going to have the benevolent dictator for a while. And if you look at like Linux, and as a project, like we have Linus, he tried to leave, and Linux basically shot the bed while he was gone. And when he came back, like, love him or hate him, but Linux is better for him being and dictating that this is the way it's going to go. Like, it became a better thing because it requires big, big, big problems, big visions, require somebody who's committed to like actually walking that path. And there are very few people who I have built around and met that have the ability to articulate, and I can even get lost in the sauce sometimes, but like Jeff is just very cool and calm and collected. And he seems like he actually gets a lot of thought to like what he actually wants to do. And that isn't to knock on any of the previous founders before us, but I think there is a stark comparison that you can take from him comparatively across the board, even from the current ones that compete on the multi-chain thesis he's working on. But it's just like an adult's in the room in a lot of respects who specifically wants financial change. We're not looking for an infinite garden. We're not trying to solve for DAOs. We're not trying to solve for all these, highly interwoven complex things beyond finance. Solving for finance on its own is the journey. And I think that's why a lot of us are gravitating so heavily towards it, is that, it's offering us a lot of what Ethereum and the original DeFi vision just never led up to.
Yeah, for sure. I think we saw exactly this on Solana. Like Solana, when it came out, was this step change in efficiency up from Ethereum. But then obviously they had multiple clients. The Jump trading team came along. They built Firedancer, which was a much faster client, and they did this ages ago. And it's live on Solana today, but it doesn't matter because the chain's always going to move at the speed of the slowest client. And so I also think that's potentially a reason why Hyperliquid hasn't gone open, as people will just start building stuff. Decentralization will become something that people talk about. But I think while that was a moat, like back in the day, ultimately finance needs to run at a certain speed. And if it's not running at that speed, it's simply just never going to get the adoption. And we've seen this play out exactly. Like, none of the perp deck solutions on Solana have been able to hold up to Hyperliquid, and nothing apart from a centralized exchange, which is the ultimate blockchain, the ultimate spreadsheet. Yeah. So I think you're exactly right in that. What excites you the most about the future of Hyperliquid from where it is today? I think everyone talks about the future of finance. You yourself, have spoken a lot about Hyperliquid, and you talk about these multi-decade long timelines. So HIP4 is sort of today, and like stepping back, I think what I'm excited about for HIP4 is, I think one of the most interesting things that it'll bring is, I think there's still reg arb in prediction markets. We sort of see this in poly market today, where there was that soldier that bet on the invasion happening and made like a ton of money. But I think there's a version of poly market that's fully private, where the amount of information that sort of rises to the surface in these prediction markets goes up even from where it is today. Because even today, like, if you have some inside information, you have to try to find a way to surface it to make money. And maybe don't be like that soldier who used his own name to make the bet and got caught. But at least for me, that's what I'm excited about, is like potentially what HIP4 brings is like this reg up where another team that's not Polymarket is able to go out and build something that, maybe isn't gonna pass against the regulatory boards in the US. But yeah, going back to my question, what excites you about Hyperliquid being a multi-decade long journey?
Actually redoing banking,
Mm.
structured products, finance, investing in general, the notion of capital markets, just thinking through how they work 24/7, 365 for us in crypto feels so boring as an offering. But if you
Yep.
think about like people 20 years older than you, like it's just, this never existed. We're going to see rate limits and, stop gaps and threshold, like on protocols and stuff like that, and some adjustments around the bend to better hit, the demands of a market. And some users will not want that and they'll just stay on protocols that don't offer those types of safeguards and requirements, and users will look for hybrids. I think what is really cool is just the notion of like a vault, especially on the institutional side. Hedge fund is really just a vault on Hyperliquid. On the EVM, since the deprecating Hypercore vault, for those that didn't know. But the notion that blockchains were always one of their best primitives we've ever had is pooling capital. So the efficiency that you can have around capital pool and then activation on that capital is still like a killer feature, right? I think ICOs come back at scale on Hyperliquid being a prime venue
Yeah.
for listing and launching. It's just liquidity. Like liquidity begets more liquidity. Once you have so much of credit default swaps, won't be surprised if they come soon. Looking at having, spread rate offerings, looking at how you can trade all manner of things. Like we're already starting to see it with HIP3, a lot of what you would expect from like early movers, but there'll be late incumbents. Like we're kind of seeing a little bit of like the total two market cap as an example. We haven't seen a compute index hasn't really come online yet, but H100 costs just keep going up to the right. And these are fantastic things to speculate on, things that like require a counterbalance. I'm really bullish though in the notion of actual Forex also happening on Hyperliquid. We're seeing a rise in non-US denominated stablecoins, nothing compared to the actual, liquidity and depth we see today. But, we may get to a point in time where we actually see $1 billion or $2 billion over the next couple of years being injected. Forex spreads, settlement costs, payments, all these things are phenomenal, vectors of growth. And I think Hyperliquid is really well positioned to capture a lot of this over time. Somebody has to, right? It's like a Tempo is like another rise of a chain that is trying some interesting things. They just announced today multiple deposit addresses,
Yep.
unique deposit addresses per customer that sweep automatically into a master account, right? Like if you
Yep.
think about it, like this is super cool. It's an amazing feature. It's net new because to do it beforehand required this whole infra stack, like baking it into the operation of a chain, is that realization that like to get adoption of these new technologies, we're going to have multiple layers of versions of these things that all kind of speak and feel the same thing, but like they also have native subscriptions. They have all these things that are coming. Hyperliquid's got a native DEX, right? Like, so these next evolution blockchains are coming and they're bringing less of the, not always, like not to trample on anything, but like less of the direct decentralization of everything from the get-go. The trade-off being made with Hyperliquid is, development speed goes faster because of a closed binary, closed source, but like the chain is public and open, right? Entrance into the chain, you can, if you had your own binary, your own code base or whatever, your own validator, you could join with your own stake. No one could stop you, right? So then it becomes the most, I would say, like, for lack of a better term to play into the meme, it's the most egalitarian thing we've ever seen, and this is going to change the way that this all works. But jokes aside, it becomes this point where value or capturing the pipeline of Hyperliquid becomes the prize, like, as large of a prize as capturing the keys to Satoshi's keys.
Yep.
So if you believe in the notion of, trillions of dollars in stablecoins are going to continue to come on chain into volume, they're going to flow to the places that have utility. Hyperliquid is the place that is going to have the most utility and maximal value for your stablecoin over time. And it's going to be, I don't know, it's just like the place that everything settles through. It just becomes, all things considered, all, from a security safety perspective, like why wouldn't you keep your money on Hyperliquid? Like if it's, assuming the risk you take there, you can leave immediately to multiple number of chains faster than you can go anywhere else. Like you can immediately buy spot, Bitcoin, all the things you want. So it just becomes that notional offering where like I'm excited that in a decade my kid will be able to use Hyperliquid, and that's maybe she'll buy her first investments and whatever that may look like. So for me, I'm most excited by the unknown. I'm most excited by the fact that what we have is the worst it's ever going to be.
For sure. I agree. I think it's super exciting to have. I think it's also just like and maybe we can lean to the last question to wrap this up, because I want to hear your take on it before I give mine. We've seen perp dexes go in and out of the market. We've seen all of them die. What do you think is Hyperliquid's real moat? Is it liquidity? Is it the people? I mean, obviously you believe the moat is going to stick around, but stepping out of yourself into someone else's body. What's your argument for why Hyperliquid's going to be here for the next cycle, but also the cycles after that as well?
Pace of execution is second to none. Execution is your real moat. Liquidity is your secondary buffer. Users your tertiary. They're really linked, but like, you could have only a handful of users, but a shit ton of liquidity, and you'll attract new users versus a handful of, or, tens of thousands of users and only a handful of liquidity. You're going to get no new users and probably no new liquidity. And so like liquidity begets liquidity. Execution costs. So like Jeff he's like a once in a lifetime founder you bet on, and so looking back and knowing what you know now about, any of the tech titans, you can be like, all right, like I had the opportunity to place a bet on Sergey Brin and I didn't take it. Right. And in 20 years from now, are you going to regret that choice? And the answer with Jeff and Hyperliquid is absolutely. If that is a baseline case and, absent Jeff running off and deciding that he doesn't want to do this anymore, and evil Jeff coming back, or
Coming back,
whatever it may
when was
be.
evil Jeff here?
We just have to assume everybody is always an adversary. Like he's been here the whole time, right? Like just assume that like we have some black swan event or something that materializes that denies the thesis. It's otherwise an undeniable bet. And so that makes the math easily trillions of liquidity. So what does trillions of liquidity net into an overall market cap?
Yeah, you're exactly right. That Jeff is just a once in a lifetime founder. And I think we've only had a couple in crypto that I think have reached its phase. And this is the first time
everyone else has gone to jail.
Has got to go. Yeah, everyone else has gone to jail or disappeared or they're Vitalik.
Or they're like a regulated exchange seat, like a SEX. They didn't build them for the DeFi revolution. They built Coinbase or, whatever.
Yeah. And I think what's been most important is everyone had a chance to take this bet. Even if you missed out on TGE of Hyperliquid and you didn't get the airdrop, you still...
the market bought for $2.
Yep, you were still there. Even if you missed that $2, it ran back down and back up. And $9. I think there's going to be much more to go. It's been an incredible thing to witness.
It's awesome to build into, like having built in a lot of these ecosystems. I'll tell you, Hyperliquid is the most aggressive PvP battleground because
it is,
like because your number one opponent is the core team. Like they're building to outbuild you, and you, like a lot of people aren't used to that because they go to the foundations like, oh no, build for us, do these things that we need. Like here's a grant, here's help, and Hyperliquid's like, do I smell revenue? Oh man, 1 second. Let me shift the car over here and make sure we're on that line too. And so like that's what's cool though. Like people often think, I'm blindly bullish. Like they borrow lend protocol. Like, isn't that competitive to what you're doing? And I'm like, oh yeah. But like, shouldn't we also have competitors though? Like, shouldn't hype holders get the best from their ecosystem? Like, take our wants and feelings aside as builders. Like the EVM is an interesting thing because you have the same free rider problem in all chains when it comes to devs. Like we had to pay a cost to deploy our contracts, but like then we just expect they're going to live there for forever. No state rent. Like we never solved these problems. They're real problems. We never really solved them. But like they're only problems when you have demand that is outsized demand for those state updates. And if you don't have that, your state doesn't grow and it doesn't matter, right? So like look at Polygon as a great example. When Polymarket leaves to their own L2, what's going to happen to their demand? Like, why are you paying for block space? Block space is abundant. We can make a new chain tomorrow. It's all about who you have captured their wants, their wishes, and how you can maximally sell to it. And distribution is the name of the game, and it always has been the name of the game for pretty much any financial market or anything that's exposed to people's money. People are price sensitive, and they form trust. Solving for those, I think, is what Hyperliquid has done a really good job of. Is the team has never asked us to trust them. They're just doing it without regard to us. And it's Jeff's world and we're living in it. At some point in time, he may decide to open it up and I believe they will. It's the only
Yeah,
pragmatic choice you can do in the end game. But are we in the end game yet? And I would say no. We've got a few more iterations of stuff to add.
yeah, 100%. I don't believe we're in the end game either, and I think Jeff has a lot more planned. There's a lot more markets to take over than what we have captured today. We've barely
In the
scratched the
bond
surface of what's
markets,
possible.
imagine if you could imagine if Hyperliquid could sell you its debt. Imagine if it could take on debt, right? It's got an ingrained financial engine. Imagine it itself, the network, could take on
Yeah,
$100 million of debt for growth. What do you want to grow into? You want to take on CME? Let's fucking go.
yeah,
Right? Let's get dated contracts. Let's go the whole shebang. What else in finance is broken? Like in the insurance game, people don't talk about insurance bonds, man. Fuck.
yeah,
You can settle these things in insurance bonds. You can start Hyperliquid
yeah,
can start insuring things or at least somebody could on Hyperliquid. I think that we've just got a lot we can do. Derivatives is a multi-quadrillion market, right? Like we got
yeah,
a lot to tap into. So that's exciting.
yeah, 100%. It's been wonderful talking, man.
Likewise.
Very excited for what you guys gonna come out with, and I'll be watching your Twitter to see what else you guys discover in the binary. And I'm looking for the Andrew clan to come out very soon. But yeah, it's amazing. And it's been wonderful to chat. And yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the pod to chat
Thanks
about
for having
everything
me.
that you guys have been doing.